Okay, I just want to apologize. I'm on crutches. I am over-exercised, but nothing dangerous here. I'm a professor at Chalmers University of Technology. Prior to that, I was at Stockholm School of Economics. And what we're going to do now is take a bit of a different trip, a little bit of a different, let's say, into the future, thinking about what do all these digital technologies mean. If we're talking about artificial intelligence, et cetera, what does that really mean for society? And that's really where my focus is, where I'm trying to understand the application of these, how we as people start using these different technologies. If any of you are interested, here are 3 books that we've just published on the influence of digitalization on various aspects of our life, future of labor, public services, the welfare state, as well as fintech. If any of you are into, how many of you are actually working with financial services? Just get a few, okay. So there's a book also on fintech if anybody's interested as well. We bought the license. Feel free to go to Rutledge. You can download it for free. And in fact, all of my slides you can actually also access for free. So what am I trying to make sense of? It's this whirlwind. It's this whirlwind of technology, but not only different technologies, it's also we as people and how are we actually applying and using these different technologies. Because one thing is that the technology comes out and it's available on the market, but how does we as individuals and society actually start using these technologies, and what does that mean for the way that we think about value creation? The way about firms, we organize those, how we organize the way we live and work and sustain ourselves, for example. So this is the whirlwind that I'm trying to make sense of. It's the technology, it's the people. It's also, I've done a lot of studies on open source software, trying to understand this relationship with, say, intellectual property and kind of this individual profit motive versus a collective together motive where we're creating something for the community. So I think this is also something that's being very much enabled here. And then finally, fintech. So this is very much what I'm trying to make sense of. Now, our challenge is, though, as Bill Gates said, right, we don't know how people, how society will adapt different technologies. And so we tend to overestimate the change that will occur within the next 2 years, but underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. This is very much because of our networks, and this is actually what I am fascinated by. Social networks, about how different resources flow through our networks. So finance, trust, reputation, knowledge, distrust. How do these flow through networks, and how do various technologies actually influence these flows? We tend to surround ourselves with people who are like ourselves, like barn, like bäst, we say in Swedish, right? So therefore, as we surround ourselves with people who are very similar to ourselves, we reinforce our worldview. And this, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we have today if you think about our social networking sites, Facebook, Instagram, etc., Google. All these algorithms are creating bubbles for us, echo chambers, where we're being surrounded with people who are very much like ourselves, which influence us and think, well, this is the way the world is. And if I'm changing and my group is changing, then everything will change. However, there can be completely different networks on the other side of the world who have a completely different view of how they're using technologies and how they're seeing the world developing. Then we have the challenge of 10 years. Well, that's no wonder. It's very difficult to look ahead 10 years, right? What will 10 years look like? Think back 10 years, 15, 20 years. How much has changed just with that? And there's, again, a bit with social networks again, because as I change my behavior, I influence 2 people, and they each influence 2 people, and they each one of them 2 people, etc. You get an exponential effect, very much called a hockey stick, where suddenly everyone is just, boom, all of a sudden behavior has changed. So if I'm in a business school and we're talking about value creation in society, these are some of our challenges. How do firms ensure that they will then be competitive in a new age as technologies become more and more, say, applied throughout society as things change? So this is something that I'm very much trying to work with. But again, it's very difficult, right? Many of you have probably seen this picture, right? How many of you have seen this photo before? How many smart mobile phones are there? Yell it out. How many smart mobile phones are there? Thank you, 0. I was hoping I would get the right answer in this group. Thank goodness, because I show this picture a lot and I ask that question and people say, oh, there's 1, there's 2. It's like, no, it wasn't even on the market yet, right? This is the inauguration of the Pope. The smart mobile phone hadn't even come to the market yet. Who would have known, right, that 8 years later, the same place would have looked like this? As a business leader, even within an organization or in a country level, how do you know? We'd have no idea how people will adopt different technologies, how these will change our behaviors, and not only that, how these will change firms. Research by MIT is looking at firms and, say, survival rates, and one of the things that we've seen is very much the length of how long a firm survives is very much declining. Looking at these large lists, for example, and seeing that since the year 2000, more than 50% of the firms on the Fortune 500 list have disappeared. Yes, some have been bought, some have been merged, but still quite a lot of them have disappeared. They have been unable to keep up with the changes. But many would argue that digital disruption has only just begun, and if think about the topics of today's conference, you can definitely see that it really has only just begun. But if we're thinking about firms and talking about business models and adaptation of different technologies, here's more research that's done by MIT. And what they did is they wanted to know, are we seeing anything different? It's not only innovation of products and services, but what about business models? Are we seeing innovation within business models? And what they've done is you see there's 4 different industries right? There's like the transportation industry, there's the overnight or the hotel industry, there's the entertainment industry, retail industry. What they did is they took in a firm that's been around for a long time, what we say an incumbent, a firm that's been there, as well as taking a newer firm that's kind of come on the scene after we've seen very much of, say, the smart mobile phones and internet being diffusing through society. Now, when they look at these firms, they say both of them within each industry, they're solving the same customer need, but just doing it in a different way. Right? So the whole idea is, I want to go from A to B. Do I need to own my own car? No, I can actually, I can share with somebody else or use an Uber or whatever. The idea is the same need is being fulfilled just in a different way. And then they're saying, so this is actually something they're talking about, multi-sided business models or platform-based business models, where you have new firms because you have the ability to actually connect, right, and be able to trace and be able to have fintech and all these different services. If you were to compile them from anew, you can solve this need in a different way by matching those who have a resource with those who would like the resource. So the whole idea here is challenging our linear way of thinking that we've had in business schools, where everything is linear. You own everything within the walls of the firm. You take care of the manufacturing process through a value chain, and you sell through your own sales and service. And all this is being put on its head, many would argue. But it's actually not only at the firm level, it's also you're seeing kind of a shifting market logic at the industry level, where we're seeing, say, we've had, very large multinationals who try to get down a unit cost of the good they're producing, so they find some, cheap labor place somewhere in the world, produce as much as they can, get down that unit cost, and then transport it halfway across the world to be sold in some, say, local retail chain. Well, what we're seeing now is because we have these platforms, you're seeing the rise of small, medium-sized firms, individuals who now can sell their products and services through these platforms anywhere in the world. And in fact, what we've seen also is that 7 of the 10 most valued firms in terms of market cap today in the world are these platform-based firms. And what do they own? Well, they don't own the actual, production facilities anymore, right? It's all about the data. It's about the network. It's network effects. It's about all of their data scientists there working hard. And so then this is saying, if we're moving this way, where are we going in terms of, say, value creation? What does this mean for society? Well, one of the firms that I like to look at, because I find that there's so much focus on the West, I think it's good to look abroad and see what other firms are out there and how are they doing things differently. So Alibaba tends to come up on the radar quite often, right? It's one of those it's soon to be one of the top 10 most valued firms. And what's interesting there is you see that it's not only a business ecosystem that's becoming important for firms. All these firms are talking now about their data ecosystems, about how they can get access to data not only through their own data that they produce and their own customers, but through relationships with all these different firms within their ecosystem and even gaining access to external data. And the amount of data scientists that Alibaba is throwing at this is amazing. In fact, they've set up quite a large lab to look at how can we solve this simple issue. Supposedly what they're trying to do is very much focus on what are the customer needs, what are the pains that people have in our industry? How can we solve them with the help of algorithms? And one of them is, if you think about Alibaba, it's very much about how can a manufacturer or somebody who's selling a product sell it to somewhere else, anywhere in the world. So if I'm walking down the street and I love that backpack, I can pull up an app, I take a picture of it, and automatically Alibaba will tell me where to go and buy it through this image processing. This is one of the solutions that they're trying to work on. They've got many different ones, and I think what's interesting is they're trying to solve many different types of challenges. So when I think about the different firms and those that are successful, it's the ones where they're starting with the actual pains, right? The frictions that customers have in the industry, and then saying, how can we solve them with the technology? Technology is the enabler. They're not starting with the technology. But here, just to give an example, one other thing that you're seeing is that Alibaba says there's tons of these mom and pop stores throughout. And I think, should we own all of them? Maybe there's another way of doing it. What kind of problems do they have? How can we support them? Well, if you think about mom and pop stores, they don't have access to data scientists. They don't know what to do with, say, data, how to collect data of their people walking through the store or working with their inventory. So Alibaba says, well, we will help you with that. One of the things that they're doing is putting sensors on the floors to monitor and track, say, people walking through the store and saying, well, the layout you have is really not a very good one. From all our data, we can see that you should actually rethink your layout, and if you do it in a different way, and you have this type of inventory and this type of pricing, you will be much more successful. So this is just one way that they're working with it. Another thing is very much with chatbots, right, and this natural language processing. But what they see there is they say, you have somebody calling up and speaking with the chatbot and saying, getting very frustrated because I have a problem and the chatbot can't understand it yet. Hasn't been programmed, I guess, to understand my specific need. So then it can realize, aha, this customer is getting very irritated, so let's send it over to a person, and a real person can answer the questions. But it's not just any person in their customer service. It's actually somebody who has actually been working with that problem. So if I'm calling up, say it's about some bicycle part that I'm very frustrated with, it's broke or something, then it would know to pass me on to somebody who is actually very good at solving bicycle part problems. Companies that are doing this are seeing a 30% increase, or we're seeing that around a 30% increase in customer service by applying this type of technology. So we're seeing continuous innovation. What does all this mean if we continue on, right? We've looked at kind of innovation and use of technology at the individual level, the business firm with business model innovation, industries. But what about society? This just came out last week from MIT. One of the biggest questions is, what is the future of labor? What's happening with all the jobs? Will they disappear as they're automated and so on? Where are we going with the future of labor? With different reports saying, 40 to 50% will disappear within this amount of time. It's not really the job, right? It's really the task. Which tasks can be automated? And so at MIT, they're saying, well, it looks like we're standing on the cusp of a technological revolution. And you're seeing this time and time again from many different sources. Here's the World Economic Forum. And I think this is a little bit what relates back to the previous talk by Eric, thinking we've seen much of this before. History rhymes. And if we put what we're seeing happen today into perspective, one is a pattern where you've seen, say, a large technological innovation. 30 to 40 years later, there's been a deep global financial crisis. And after that, there's been kind of a transformation, this industrial revolution. The way we work, live, sustain ourselves, organize value creation has been transformed. Think about this. How long have we worked in firms, if you think about how long we've lived, say, on the planet? It's only been a few hundred years. How long have we had multinational organizations, such as, say, those who are supporting much of this research? About SEB and, say, Atlas Copco or Ericsson. Only 1870s, 1880s around there. What about B2C, business consumer, H&M, IKEA? How long have we had multinational retail firms? It's not even 100 years. So who said that this type of value creation, the way we organize ourselves, will continue? And many are arguing, well, perhaps we're into this third industrial revolution, or perhaps it's already moving into the fourth, where we're seeing a transformation of society. So this makes me curious, are we actually changing? This isn't that long ago, is it? Working in factories. What's interesting, I come from business school and management, and it seems like we're still stuck in this frame of mind where you have to clock in and clock out, and you can't have fun at work, right? You have your defined roles and responsibilities and tasks, etc. And you have to come to the office. And this is where, I feel we are stuck. Well, then we moved into knowledge work, right? This was in the 90s. This is when I started doing my PhD, trying to understand email, online communities. How are individuals actually using these new technologies to actually solve their problems? Well, now if I were to go there today, well, many of those jobs have disappeared, right? Look at the financial services industry, where many of the tasks are repetitive. They can be programmed away. So not only are we seeing this, right, we're also seeing lights out factories. Although interestingly, I read that the other day that I was one of the large Japanese car factories, or for manufacturers, they're actually sending people back in now because they're saying there's no development. When everything is like lights out, they don't see any development in their actual manufacturing processes. So we have lights out factories. We even have lights out pizza factories. Has anybody ordered pizza from a lights out pizza restaurant? You pull up your phone, you got the app there, you order your pizza, it sends the order to the robot from ABB, makes your pizza, and then it puts it in AV and drives it home to you. Hey, have you had that? Oh, sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. Yeah, fascinating to see. And that makes me think, well, where are the jobs going? How many of you have heard of Automatic? How many of you have heard of WordPress? I hope all of you, yeah, right? WordPress has 25% of the world's market in content management systems, right? Blogs, internet pages, CMS. 25% of the world's market. Interesting that none of you have heard of the company Automatic. Well, WordPress, right? Open source software. Automatic is the company that's very much facilitating the development of WordPress. How many employees do they have? About 800. Spread across the world, wherever they want to work, and no physical offices. What does that mean about how we organize the way we work and the way we live? Do we have to leave home and go to work, go to the office? Well, we don't know, do we? I take this as being very much a signal from the periphery, something that's saying perhaps we're moving towards a different future. We don't know what the future holds, do we? But remote working is definitely on the rise. Digital nomads, gigs, all this is very much on the rise where people can work anywhere they'd like to, as long as they have a connection. But if we do this, what else are we seeing? What other, signals from the periphery do we see in terms of how the way we organize society might be changing? Well, it's not only, remote work. We're actually developing technologies now where we can create these self-sustaining villages. This is a project in Holland, where the whole idea is we can sustain ourselves with our own energy, right? With food, with medicine. I mean, we already have the company in Gothenburg that's 3D printing different parts of our body. As we start even more 3D printing organs, etc., creating our own energy, getting our work working through here, perhaps will society look like this, where how many cars are up there? What about all this, self-driving vehicles? Maybe we don't need them. Maybe everything's within walking distance. I think there are many, many unknowns. We don't know what the future holds, do we? And another question is, what about those connected oil platforms? Well, maybe they might be turned into cities. In fact, these are different projects going on now. Who said we had to live on Earth? We can live on the sea, out in the sea, if we have the ability to self-sustain ourselves. So we really don't know where we're going with the future, do we? And many people talk about this trend of moving towards this urbanization, et cetera, where 50% of the world's population will be living in cities and so on. But what will a city look like? Will it be a mega city? Or will we see many, smaller, medium-sized cities or villages that are self-sustaining and communities? We also have a big focus on the circular economy now, right? If we continue to use the resources that we're using now, especially in all the electronics, we're using up all of our resources. There was a fascinating lecture I went to the other day by a professor at Chalmers where she was talking about the number of different metals in cars and how that's just exploded in recent years because of all the new technology that's going into these. But yet we don't have the resources. And in fact, when we're designing our products today, it's not made with the whole circular economy in thought. So for all these, our phones, our computers, our cars, etc., are made, but they can't be very well taken apart so that the different materials in them can be reused. One of the things that one is seeing because of this is potentially business models who won't be going, much more the servitization. You don't sell a product, you actually sell it as, you sell the service, you lease, right? So you sell lighting. Philips sells lighting, not light bulbs, to the airport at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. Because then you actually can reinforce the circular economy, new business models coming along. So we don't really know. How can we prepare for the future? Where are we going? And if I'm out speaking a lot with different managers and firms, etc., this is often the picture I show. We're not very good at looking into the future. In fact, universities, they teach us very well about how to learn about the past, but what about thinking about the future? But yet all our strategic decisions have to be made for the future. But what we know is only a little piece. What we don't even know is huge. We have no idea. There's so much more, especially as we see more and more of the convergence of technologies. Yet technology is only one piece of the puzzle if we're thinking about the future. I love technology. I have to constantly remind myself of this model because this also influences the future. We have a lot of different uncertainties. Will we go more towards a closed world with trade wars or more of an open world? Will we say, what will happen in terms of the sociological? Will we move more towards major cities or smaller cities? Will we work for firms or not? Many unknowns. And one of the things that clearly has come very much on the tapete, or on the discussion today, is how will we fulfill the SDGs by the United Nations? A woman was in California the other day speaking to one of the C-level and the top managers of one of our large tech companies from Silicon Valley. And they truly believed that all this climate crisis was something that North Korea had come up with. So we are a bit of a bubble here. So I encourage you all we need to think more about this and how we spread this discussion of climate crisis. But another issue that I see that a lot of people that kind of gets forgotten, I just want to talk about kind of, in a way, the other side too. And if we think about IoT, it means that, yes, everything becomes connected. But what does that mean? Oh, it's fun for all those hackers, isn't it? Cybersecurity, in fact, we're working a lot with that. How much do firms talk about cybersecurity and the risks? Well, Casino was hacked by the thermometer in its fish tank because it was hooked up to the public internet. That one little thing, and through that, they could hack right in to the entire building automation system. This is becoming a real threat. And even so, I found this site where you can actually go in and you can find out, this is a site where you can search for, say, different items, different things that are hooked up to the public internet. So I just put in BAS for Building Automation System, and automatically I find a nice IP address where I can just probably go and hack it if I'd like. I think this is something we tend to forget, so it's also important to raise this issue. How are we thinking about the different risks? And more than likely, one will be hacked, but how do we take care of it? And so what we're seeing is within firms that while companies are progressing in terms of their ability to apply digital technologies to come up with new ideas, leadership is falling behind. And we're seeing this very much at the board level, and much of the research I'm doing right now is actually looking at the board level. Many other things have changed. Firms and how we're working and business models, et cetera, ecosystems, but what about boards? In fact, it's quite much the same. Our challenge is that boards tend to overestimate their digital savviness. MIT went out and they actually trained an algorithm to rate, to categorize board members by their digital savviness. And when you ask them, board members, oh yeah, we know a lot about digital technology and transformation, this algorithm had quite a different picture. So one of the projects we're working on is funded actually by Combient and Vinnova, where we're looking at the board level, trying to understand how are they preparing in terms of for this new time of cybersecurity and new forms of thinking about perhaps agile leadership, et cetera, at the board level. And also working very much with Chalmers. What I'm doing now is show you a little bit about some of the research that we're conducting now, where we're trying to understand what does all this mean for society? What does this mean in terms of small internet firms as well? Not only the large firms that we see within Sweden, but what about the new? Can we map, say, the AI ecosystem of Sweden? And we thought we could use algorithms and use all this tremendous amount of data that Sweden has on firms, but it's proving a very difficult task. If anybody's been working with that, please come and talk with me, because we're really trying to crack that one. So I think moving forward, looking into the future, what I try to do is think about where have we been, where are we going, and I think if we're going to solve a lot of the challenges that we have today, a lot of the global challenges that we have, we really need to start thinking differently. It's not about exploitation where we're doing all the things we've already been doing a little bit better, a little bit faster, maybe a little bit cheaper, but it's actually about thinking about if we were to start over and explore and do something new, what could we do? And I think one way of exploring is also about building new bridges and looking how we can combine the old with the new. So one of the projects that we're working a lot now is actually focused much on towards the ocean. The ocean is very much a critical state. But how can we use these different new technologies that are coming along and weave them in with traditional resources and knowledge that we have of the ocean to actually come up with new innovations, with new ideas that are sustainable? And so one of the projects that we're working on is Ocean Data Factory Sweden. Any of you heard of this project? All right, well now all of you have, right? So this is a project funded by Vinnova. Vinnova funded 8 data innovation labs last spring, and this is one of the 8. So I'm the director of this Ocean Data Factory, and it's a wide collaboration of many different people. And what we're trying to do is say, how can we actually enable data-driven innovation? One of our first things that we're working on is trying to predict the spread of that little bitty 2-centimeter shrimp from the area of Amsterdam up into the Baltic. Because this shrimp is a horrible shrimp. It eats everything in its way. It destroys ecosystems. So what we're trying to do is simulate and say, well, what will happen if, say, we see this type of climate change, or if, say, the pH levels change, or the temperature, et cetera, or transportation routes, will we see this shrimp move into the Baltic? Could we? What might happen? And not only that, how might that influence the local, say, ecosystem, the local biosphere, and those firms that are dependent upon it? So this is one of the things that we're working with. And as you see, I really liked Eric's slide where he talked about, multi-stakeholder. It's a real challenge. I think one of the biggest challenges today is learning to work in these multi-stakeholder collaborations. And as you see here, we have people from Norway, Sweden, and Portugal in this. And I think this is also about, if we think about Sweden very much, Sweden has always been leading in many different areas. And so what we've been doing is very much trying to build bridges with Portugal, also a very large seafaring nation. And so this Friday, I'll be down in PENICHE in Portugal actually working on the development of a hub, or a network of smart ocean hubs, where the idea is to spread our knowledge. It could be an entrepreneur in Norway has a fantastic idea about, say, a new type of shrimp or something, but wants to test in another environment. How can we enable that? So it's about building and seeing how can we share knowledge with one another. And one of the things that we're doing, why am I down in PENICHE, is actually I'm trying to really jump out of my office as a traditional academic. I've done all my articles and books, and I'm really trying, can I explore and apply my knowledge that I've gained through the years? What's happening in terms of digitalization and digital transformation of society? What about this digital divide? There's so much effort going into smart cities and large firms, but what about those people who don't live in, say, a large city or not working for a large firm? What about those in rural areas? And I think that's where we can really focus and see how can we build on the competence which is there in many rural areas around the world. So one of the areas that we're working on is very much in coastal communities, and how can we rejuvenate coastal communities? So think of a small-scale fishing boat, where you have a local fisherman going out and, say, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and looking for, say, sardines. Coming back 7 o'clock in the next morning, no sardines out there. Well, it's because 90% of sardines have been fished out of the sea. Goes out the next day. What we're seeing is different coastal communities that have been some of the richest in the world are now some of the poorest because of automation, because of globalization. And that makes me question, could this be a parallel to other industries as we see more, say, industries being automated and globalized? So we are working on this project which we call PENICHE Ocean Watch, and the whole idea is, let's start with a challenge. One big challenge is marine litter. 90% of all trash in the ocean is at the ocean floor. It's not floating on the surface, it's actually on the bottom, but we don't see it. So how could we use, say, drones to actually locate that? And we're working on one project, the Pelodrone, where we're working to train an algorithm to identify, say, ghost nets at the bottom of the sea, but also to actually identify fish, to enable those small-scale fishermen to find the fish more efficiently so they don't have to go out and sail for 12 hours without finding anything. But it's also about pulling up this, and we're seeing how can we then build on their resources, those in the local community. They have knowledge about boats, they have knowledge about the sea, about uncertain conditions. Can we work with them to repurpose their ships to actually, say, fish up the marine litter at the bottom of the sea? But that's not enough. What will you do with it? And the whole idea here is taking a step back and saying, if we have these challenges, how can we use different technologies, weave them together with the local knowledge and resources to create a circular model? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can use 3D printing. If we're talking about circular economy, we want to do things locally. We don't want to ship the ocean litter halfway across the world to be made into glasses, eyeglasses, to then be sold somebody else. Let's solve a local need. So could we use 3D printing? And while we're at it, we can perhaps reinforce it with, say, carbon or graphene. And we're talking with a company in Uppsala about this. Well, what will we produce? Well, why not self-driving vehicles? Because one of the big needs in coastal communities is that there's very poor local transportation. So could we not then create, say, a self-driving vehicle, or even just one that you could drive yourself potentially, out of these? Everything I show you today already exists. They already have innovations in this whole thing, including the blockchain. We can put it on the blockchain so that when a tourist comes and, say, takes the pod, they can pay in the local currency, and the money goes back into those who've been involved in the process, or for the elderly woman who's charging that pod through her solar panels. And while we're at it, if she's going to the doctor, perhaps the doctor could go to her. We could think differently too. Could we create autonomous driving medical offices or so on? So the whole idea is, let's take a step back and try to solve a lot of our global challenges with these technologies, taking a holistic perspective, seeing what are the needs and how can we weave them together. This is very much, I'd say, a kind of a social experiment. We're working on different projects throughout this wheel. And who knows where we'll end up, but it sure is exciting. So with that, I'd like to leave you with a couple things. Which one of these individuals, A or B, they both have 5 relationships, is more innovative? You can't tell, can you? Think about yourselves as moving forward in this world of uncertainty. What's important is to understand, how do you fit into a larger network? Do you build bridges to different types of networks to get new signals, to see new ideas? Where does innovation come from? It comes from building bridges with people who are not like yourselves. It doesn't come from staying within your comfort zone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you.
So